It's funny how summers in small-town America always look the same until one day they don't. I thought mine would be filled with backyard barbecues, late-night video games with my best friend, and the suffocating boredom of sticky July afternoons. I didn't expect that the man I'd known my whole life, me best friend's father, would tear open my world with a single truth I was never supposed to hear. Mr. Callahan wasn't the kind of man who drew attention to himself. He was steady, reserved, the quiet shadow lingering at the edge of our teenage chaos. Widowed for as long as I could remember, he raised his son, Ethan, with the sort of patient strength most fathers couldn't muster. To me, he was just Mr. C, the man who grilled burgers at block parties and gave us rides when our bikes gave out. Ordinary, predictable, safe. But safety has a way of shattering when you realize someone you thought you knew is more than what they let you see. And that summer, when I turned 19, I saw him differently for the first time. It was in the way his eyes lingered just a little too long, the silence between his words, and the night I overheard him speaking in a voice I'd never known. He had a voice full of loneliness, yearning, and something dangerously close to confession. The Callahan house had always been my second home. Ethan and I had been best friends since kindergarten, our lives woven together in ways that felt inevitable. His mother had passed when he was barely 5, so I never remembered her face at the dinner table. Instead, it was always just the three of us, Ethan, Mr. C, and me. That July afternoon, Ethan had left for a last-minute camping trip with some college friends. I wasn't invited, not because Ethan didn't want me there, but because the group was tight-knit, and I didn't know them. Mr. C told me to stay anyway. "You practically live here, Liam," he said with a smile, handing me a soda. "No reason to stop now." I stayed. Maybe I shouldn't have. The night pressed heavy with heat, cicadas buzzing like electricity in the trees. I wandered downstairs for water, barefoot, and that's when I heard it. His voice, low and raw, spilling from the porch where he thought he was alone. "I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending," he murmured, the words catching like gravel in his throat. God, if she could see me now, if Ethan ever knew. He broke off, his breath a jagged sound, followed by silence. I froze, my heart hammering. Felt wrong to listen, but my body wouldn't move. Every word hooked me deeper, pulling me into something I had no right to hear. The next morning, breakfast was awkward. He cooked pancakes, flipping them with an ease that suggested nothing had been said the night before. But when his eyes met mine, just for a second, I swore I saw a flicker of the man behind those broken words. Vulnerable. Human. "Sleep well?" he asked. Casual. Too casual. Yeah. I lied, even as my mind replayed his confession. For the first time, I looked at him not as Ethan's father, not as the man who signed permission slips or offered rides, but as someone carrying a secret heavy enough to break his back. And maybe it was reckless, maybe even cruel, but I wanted to know what it was. That summer unfolded in small moments that felt too charged to be accidents. A brush of his hand when he passed me a plate. The way his laughter softened when it was just the two of us. The night we stayed up late watching an old movie, and I caught him watching me instead of the screen. It was subtle, but it was there. And once you notice something, you can't unsee it. One evening, rain poured heavy against the windows, trapping us inside. Ethan wouldn't be back for 2 more days, and the silence between us had grown too thick to ignore. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, nursing a glass of bourbon, his hair damp from running outside to cover the grill. "Liam," he said suddenly, my name hanging heavy in the air. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you've been wearing the wrong skin so long you forget what it feels like to breathe?" I swallowed hard, my chest tight. "Sometimes," I admitted, though I wasn't sure if I meant it or if I just wanted him to keep talking. His gaze pinned me, sharp and searching. For the first time, I realized how dangerous his presence felt, not because he was unsafe, but because he was pulling me into something I couldn't turn away from. And in that moment, I knew the summer wasn't just about Ethan, or friendship, or the dull ache of growing up. It was about him, about Mr. Callahan, about the secret he carried and the way it tethered itself to me. The first touch happened by accident, or maybe not. I dropped a glass, shards scattering across the kitchen floor. He knelt to help me, our hands colliding over a piece of broken glass. His skin was warm, his touch firm but trembling, as if he was holding back something that wanted to break free. "Careful," he whispered, his voice husky. But he didn't let go of my hand right away. My breath hitched. The world tilted. For a split second, I let myself believe that the space between us could collapse, that whatever secret he held might have something to do with me. And that thought both terrified and thrilled me. The days blurred into a rhythm of heat and silence, of looks that lingered too long, of conversations that circled around the truth without ever landing on it. He was careful, so careful. Always a step away from saying what he wanted to, always holding himself back. But I wasn't careful. I was 19, reckless, and burning with questions. One night, pushed. "Mr. C," I said, my voice breaking the quiet hum of the crickets outside. "What were you talking about that night? On the porch, when you thought no one was listening?" His entire body stilled. The bourbon glass in his hand trembled. "You shouldn't have heard that," he said finally, his voice low. "But I did. I pressed. And I can't stop thinking about it." His eyes met mine, filled with something raw, something that scared me because it was the same thing I felt in my chest. "Liam," he whispered, his voice fraying, "don't ask me for the truth unless you're ready for what it will cost." And I knew then, in the heavy pause that followed, that nothing about this summer would ever be ordinary again. I should have backed off that night. I should have laughed, shrugged it off, and pretended I'd never heard him whispering to the dark. But something in his eyes, wounded, restless, almost pleading, kept me from retreating. We sat across from each other in the dim light of the kitchen, the air thick with humidity and unspoken truths. The bourbon glass was still in his hand, though he hadn't taken a sip in minutes. He was holding onto it the way drowning men hold onto driftwood, as though it might keep him steady in waters that were quickly turning violent. "I don't want safe answers," I said finally, surprising myself with the strength of my voice. "I don't want half-truths. If there's something you need to say, I want to hear it, even if it changes everything." The muscles in his jaw flexed. He looked older in that moment, not because of the faint lines at his eyes or the streaks of silver in his hair, but because of the weight pressing on him. A man shouldn't have to live with secrets that big. "You're 19, Liam," he said at last, his tone a mixture of warning and exhaustion. "You don't understand what it means to carry something for decades, to bury it so deep that it eats at you from the inside. Some things are better left unsaid." I leaned forward, my palms pressed against the table. "And yet you almost said it. Out there, on the porch. You wanted someone to hear. Maybe you wanted me to hear." That got him. His eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face before he looked away. He stood abruptly, chair scraping across the tile. He poured the rest of his bourbon down the sink and gripped the counter, his back turned to me. "I can't do this," he muttered. "You already are," I said softly. Silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the steady patter of rain against the windows. I half expected him to order me out of the house, to slam the door and lock himself away. But instead, His shoulders slumped, and when he finally turned, the fight was gone from his eyes. "You're right," he whispered. "Maybe I did want you to hear. Maybe I'm so damn tired of pretending I don't know how to stop." That night didn't end with some grand revelation. He didn't confess everything in one breath, nor did I push him to. Instead, we stood at opposite ends of a storm neither of us knew how to calm. He went upstairs, and I lay awake in Ethan's empty room, listening to the house creak around me. But the air between us had shifted. Something invisible but undeniable tethered us now, pulling me toward him with a force I couldn't name. The next morning, the sun returned as if nothing had happened, drying the earth and painting the world gold. He was already in the kitchen when I came down, frying eggs and bacon like it was any ordinary Saturday. "Hungry?" he asked, his voice steady, his eyes betraying nothing. "Yeah," I said, though my appetite was non-existent. We ate in silence, the clink of forks on plates louder than any words we might have spoken. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man from the night before, the man who had cracked open his armor, even if just for a moment, and I knew it wouldn't be enough to stop there. 2 days later, Ethan returned from his trip, sunburned and grinning, full of stories I half listened to. Around him, Mr. C slid effortlessly back into the role of father, the careful mask locked in place. I wondered if Ethan noticed the stiffness in his dad's smile, the way his eyes darted toward me and quickly away. If he did, he didn't say anything. It was torture. Those first days with Ethan home again. I wanted to talk, to push further, but the presence of my best friend was a wall we couldn't climb. So I waited. I smiled when Ethan teased me, played along when we watched movies, and pretended not to feel the weight of Mr. C's gaze across the room. One night, after Ethan had gone to bed, I lingered downstairs under the pretense of grabbing a soda. Mr. C was still awake, sitting at the table with a half-finished crossword. His eyes lifted when I entered, and for a moment, everything else fell away. "You're going to drive yourself crazy," I said, nodding at the crossword. He smirked faintly. "Better than bourbon." I took a step closer, then another, until I was standing across from him, my hands shoved deep into my pockets to stop them from shaking. "You don't have to pretend with me," I said quietly. His face hardened, but not with anger, with fear. "And what if pretending is the only thing keeping this house from falling apart?" The raw honesty in his voice cut through me. I wanted to tell him I could help hold it together, that he didn't have to bear the weight alone. Instead, I reached out, my hand brushing against the crossword puzzle. His fingers tightened around the pen, knuckles white. For one heartbeat, the world was still. And then, just as quickly, he pulled away. "Go to bed, Liam," he said, his tone final. But his voice shook. The push and pull continued for weeks, each day thick with tension. I began to notice the smallest things. How he lingered in doorways when I was in the room. How his laughter softened only when we were alone. How his eyes betrayed him no matter how carefully he avoided mine. And then came the night everything cracked. It was late August, the air heavy with the promise of summer's end. Ethan had gone out with friends again, leaving me and his dad alone. We sat on the porch, the night quiet except for the hum of crickets. "You'll be heading back to campus soon, Mr. C said after a long silence. "Yeah," I said. "A couple weeks." He nodded, his jaw tight. "It'll be good for you. Start fresh." I studied him in the dim light, the way the shadows cut across his face. "You talk like you want me gone." His head whipped toward me, his eyes fierce. "Don't say that. That's the last thing I want." The words slipped out before he could stop them. His chest rose and fell. And in the heavy pause that followed, I felt the truth buzzing in the air between us like static. "Then what do you want?" I asked. My voice was steady, though inside I was shaking. He didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, his hand reached across the space between us, stopping just short of mine. It hovered there, trembling, as if the act of closing that distance would unravel everything. I closed it for him. Our fingers brushed, then laced together. A quiet, desperate confession neither of us dared to speak aloud. His hand was warm, rough, but the grip was gentle, almost reverent. In that moment, I knew his secret, and I knew it was mine now too. The kiss came later, tentative and stolen in the dark. I don't even remember who leaned in first. Only the sudden heat of his mouth against mine, the taste of bourbon and regret, the sharp inhale that shattered the silence around us. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, cautious, interrupted by whispers of "we shouldn't" and "I can't." But beneath it all was something deeper, years of loneliness unraveling, colliding with the reckless certainty of youth. When he finally pulled away, his forehead pressed against mine. His voice was ragged. "This can't happen," he whispered. "Not with you. Not like this." But his lips trembled, and his hand still held mine. And I knew it would happen again. Because some secrets, once revealed, refused to stay buried. I couldn't sleep after that kiss. My skin burned where his lips had touched mine, every nerve still alive with the memory. It was the kind of kiss that rearranged something inside you, that refused to be filed away as an accident. And yet, he tried. The next morning, he was back to being Mr. Callahan, reserved, careful, moving around the kitchen with a stiffness that screamed of denial. Ethan was home again, loud and oblivious, retelling stories from his night out, while his dad stood at the stove like nothing had happened. But I knew better. Every time his eyes flicked to mine and then away, I felt the truth humming between us. He could bury it, lock it down behind his silence. But it was there, alive, waiting. The days that followed were torture. Being near him felt dangerous. Being away from him felt unbearable. I kept thinking about that kiss, about the way his hand had clung to mine, desperate and tender. And I wanted more. One night, Ethan and I were in his room, scrolling through music on his laptop, laughing at bad playlists. But my mind was elsewhere. I could hear the faint sound of his father moving downstairs, the low hum of a TV, the occasional clink of a glass. Every part of me wanted to be down there instead. "Dude, you're out of it," Ethan teased, nudging me. "What's up with you lately?" I forced a laugh. "Just tired." If only he knew. The chance came 2 nights later. Ethan had crashed early after a long day out in the sun, and the house was quiet. I slipped downstairs under the pretense of grabbing a drink. But the truth was I wanted to see him. He was sitting in the living room, a book in his lap, glasses perched on his nose. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment, the mask slipped. His eyes softened in a way that made my chest ache. "Can't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head. "You?" He closed the book slowly. "Same." I sat across from him, but the space felt unbearable. So I shifted closer, drawn to him like a moth to flame. "About the other night," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. His jaw tightened. "We shouldn't talk about it." "But it happened," I insisted. "And pretending it didn't, that's worse." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly. "You don't understand, Liam. If Ethan ever found out, if anyone found out, it would destroy everything." I hesitated, my throat dry. "Maybe it doesn't have to." His head snapped toward me, eyes blazing with something between anger and desperation. You're 19. You think love conquers all. You think the world is kind to people like me. I flinched at his words, but I didn't back down. I don't know what the world thinks. I only know what I feel. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. Then, slowly, he reached out, his hand brushing mine on the couch cushion. Don't say that, he whispered. Not unless you mean it. I do, I said. Steady now. I've never meant anything more. That night, he let himself unravel a little more. Not all at once. Not in some grand confession, but in fragments. He told me about the loneliness, about how he'd buried himself in work and fatherhood after his wife died, how he'd convinced himself that desire was something he could live without. He spoke of guilt, of fear, of the nights he sat awake, suffocated by secrets. And then, when his voice broke, I reached for him. The kiss this time wasn't hesitant. It was hungry, aching, the kind of kiss that said we were both tired of running. His hands framed my face, trembling, as if he couldn't believe I was real. Mine clung to his shirt, pulling him closer, needing him like air. When we finally broke apart, breathless, his forehead rested against mine. God help me, he murmured. I can't stay away from you. The days that followed blurred into stolen moments. A brush of his hand when Ethan wasn't looking. Late-night whispers in the kitchen. The heat of his lips on mine in the dark hallway. Quick and desperate before we pulled apart at the sound of footsteps upstairs. It was dangerous, reckless, and yet felt inevitable. I began to notice how careful he was around Ethan, how he made sure never to linger too close to me when his son was near, how he avoided looking at me too long. But the restraint only made the nights alone more intense. One evening, after Ethan had gone to a friend's for the weekend, we finally let go. The house was ours, the silence electric. We didn't speak, much words felt unnecessary, even dangerous. Instead, we let touch say what we couldn't. His hands were rough, practiced, but tender in ways that made my chest ache. Mine were clumsy but desperate, hungry for him. When it was over, we lay side by side, the ceiling fan spinning lazily above us. My head rested on his chest, his heartbeat strong beneath my ear. For the first time, I felt the weight lift from him, just a little. Do you regret it? I asked softly. He was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, he said, I regret waiting this long to feel alive again. But happiness, quickly learned, was fragile. The following week, Ethan walked in on us not kissing, not touching, but close enough. We were in the kitchen, our bodies angled too intimately, our laughter too easy. Ethan froze in the doorway, his eyes darting between us. What's going on? He asked, suspicion sharp in his voice. Panic flared in Mr. Callahan's eyes. He stepped back, putting distance between us. Nothing, he said quickly. Just talking. Ethan's gaze lingered on me, narrowed. Sure. He stormed upstairs, leaving behind a silence heavier than any we'd endured before. I looked at Mr. See, my chest tight. He knows. Not yet, he said, his voice grim. But if we're not careful, he will. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for his son. And in that moment, I realized our secret wasn't just ours anymore. It was a bomb waiting to go off. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my stomach churning with dread. Ethan's face kept replaying in my mind, his narrowed eyes, the sharpness in his voice, the way he looked at me like I was someone he couldn't recognize anymore. I knew then that we were standing at the edge of something dangerous. Down the hall, I heard muffled footsteps, a door closing softly. I knew it was him, Mr. Callahan, pacing, restless, caught in the same storm as me. The next morning, the air in the house was brittle. Ethan avoided me at breakfast. His words clipped, his laughter forced. His dad played his part flawlessly, but I could see the tightness in his shoulders. The way his hand lingered on his coffee mug as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. "I'll be out late tonight," Ethan said suddenly, not looking at either of us. "Don't wait up." He grabbed his backpack and was gone before we could respond. The silence he left behind was deafening. "He suspects," I whispered. "Mr. C nodded, his face grim. "We have to be careful. For his sake." But the problem was, careful had stopped being enough. The more we tried to hide, the stronger the pull became. And every time I thought about walking away, the memory of his lips, his hands, his voice dragged me right back. That evening, we found ourselves alone again. The house felt different without Ethan in it, quieter, heavier. He was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water. When I stepped in, "You can't keep looking at me like that when he's around," I said, my voice low, though my heart was racing. His eyes flicked to mine, guarded. "And how do I look at you?" "Like I'm the only person in the room," I whispered. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he set the glass down and closed the distance between us in 2 strides. "You are," he said, his voice rough. And then his mouth was on mine, desperate, as if he'd been holding his breath for days. We kissed like men starving, like the world outside that kitchen didn't exist. His hands framed my face, pulling me closer, while mine clutched at his shirt, afraid he'd disappear if I let go. But when we finally broke apart, breathless, guilt flickered in his eyes. "This is madness," he whispered. "If Ethan, he doesn't know for sure." I cut in, my voice urgent. "And maybe he never has to. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. I can't keep pretending I don't want you." He looked at me like I was both salvation and destruction all at once. Then he kissed me again, softer this time, as if committing the taste of me to memory. "I don't deserve this," he said. "Maybe I get to decide what you deserve," I answered. The next few days were a blur of secrecy and longing. We stole moments when we could, quick touches, lingering glances, whispered words in the dark. But Ethan's suspicion lingered like a storm cloud overhead. He began watching us more closely, testing me with pointed questions. "You've been spending a lot of time with my dad," he said one afternoon, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. I shrugged, forcing a laugh. "I've always spent time with him. You know that." He didn't smile. "Yeah, just feels different lately." His words hit like a knife. For the first time, I realized just how dangerous the truth could be, not just for me and Mr. Callahan, but for Ethan, for his family, for the fragile world we were all trying to hold together. One night, Ethan invited me to join him and some friends at a bonfire. I went, hoping it would ease his suspicion. But the entire time I felt like I was living someone else's life. They laughed, drank, played music under the stars. But all I could think about was him waiting back at the house. Maybe pacing. Maybe sitting alone in the quiet. Missing me the way I missed him. When I got home, the house was dark. But he was awake, sitting on the porch, the glow of his cigarette faint in the night. "You should have stayed with them," he said when he saw me. "I didn't want to," I replied, moving closer. The look in his eyes told me he wanted to believe me, but fear still lingered. "You're playing with fire, Liam." I sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his body. Then let it burn. For a long time, we didn't speak. The night wrapped around us, heavy and infinite. And then, slowly, he reached for my hand, threading his fingers through mine. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt like the bravest thing he'd ever done. The breaking point came a week later. Ethan found my phone on the coffee table. I'd been careless, leaving it unlocked. A message from his dad glowing on the screen. Can't stop thinking about last night. Stay after he's asleep. I came downstairs to find Ethan standing there, my phone in his hand, his face pale and furious. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice shaking. My heart stopped. Ethan. You and him. His voice cracked, equal parts rage and betrayal. Tell me it's not true. Liam. Tell me you're not screwing my dad behind my back. Before I could speak, Mr. Callahan appeared in the doorway, his face stricken. Ethan. No. Ethan's voice thundered, raw and broken. Don't you dare. Both of you've been lying to me this whole time. His chest heaved, his fists clenched. I had never seen him like that. You were my best friend. He spat at me. And he turned to his father. His voice cracking, you were supposed to be my dad. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then Ethan shoved the phone onto the table, the crack echoing through the room. I can't look at either of you right now. He stormed out, the door slamming so hard the windows rattled. And just like that, our secret was no longer a secret. I stood frozen, my pulse racing, my throat tight with panic. Mr. Callahan ran a hand over his face, his shoulders slumping. God, what have we done? I swallowed hard, my voice shaking. We told the truth, even if it wasn't with words. He turned to me, his eyes heavy with despair. And now we've lost him. But I refused to believe it. Not yet. He's angry, I said, stepping closer. He feels betrayed. But anger fades. He loves you. And he loves me, even if he doesn't see it right now. He shook his head, his voice breaking. Some wounds don't heal. Then we fight for it. I whispered. We fight for him. For us. For all of it. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. The storm that had nearly torn us apart now felt like a distant echo, replaced by something warmer, quieter, and infinitely more terrifying, the simple truth of love. Michael and I had stopped pretending. No more stolen glances that burned us alive. No more conversations dipped in denial. It was out in the open, heavy in the air like the summer humidity, yet freeing in a way that made every breath feel like the first one after drowning. But freedom never comes without cost. The town had eyes. They always did. And a widower's life, especially one like Michael's, was under constant scrutiny. People whispered in grocery aisles, church, outside the diner where I picked up milkshakes to go. Some of those whispers had sharp edges, ones meant to wound. I remember one afternoon vividly. I had walked into the hardware store to pick up nails for Michael's deck project. And Mr. Duval, the store owner, leaned across the counter with a knowing smirk. You and Mr. Hayes fixing up a lot together. His voice dragged on the word lot. I smiled stiffly, dropped cash on the counter, and walked out without responding. My ears burned all the way back to the truck. When I told Michael, he didn't flinch. He just placed his large, calloused hand over mine and said softly, let them talk. They don't know us. It sounded brave, but I could see the storm brewing in his eyes. July bled into August. The days stretched endlessly hot, cicadas screaming in the trees. Nights were softer, where crickets sang and the lake glowed under the moon. Those nights became ours. Michael and I would sit on the porch, shoulders brushing, the silence between us not empty but full, like the quiet of a church before confession. Sometimes he'd reach over and thread his fingers through mine, holding on as if the world outside might rip us apart at any second. One night, I broke the silence. "Do you regret it?" I asked. My voice was barely above a whisper. "Regret what?" "Us." He turned, eyes wide, then softened. "No. God. No. You. Not even for a second." The relief in his smile was so tender it nearly broke me. But happiness was fragile. His son-me best friend had been avoiding both of us. At first I thought it was coincidence, but soon it was obvious. Texts unanswered, calls ignored. When I finally cornered him at the gas station, he wouldn't even meet my eyes. "You don't get it." He spat when I pressed him. "He's my dad." "And you," he shook his head, voice breaking. "You ruined everything." It was like being stabbed. That night, I sat in Michael's living room, hands shaking, and told him everything. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal in his son's voice. Michael listened in silence, jaw clenched, before finally speaking. "I knew this day would come," he whispered. "I just prayed it wouldn't be like this." "What do we do?" I asked. "We wait. We love him. And we don't hide anymore." It sounded so simple. It wasn't. 2 weeks passed. The air shifted, the scent of autumn creeping in. School was starting again soon, and with it the end of summer. The end of the bubble Michael and I had lived in. Reality pressed harder with each passing day. Then, one Sunday evening, his son came home. He stood in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes red-rimmed from either anger or tears I couldn't tell. He looked at me first, then at his father. "You love him, don't you?" he asked Michael directly. Michael's breath caught, but his answer was steady. "Yes." The silence that followed stretched painfully long. Finally, his son's lips trembled. "Then, I guess I have to figure out how to live with that." He walked past us into his room, door shutting with a soft click. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. The last week of summer was bittersweet. Michael and I spent it finishing the deck, hands brushing as we worked, laughter breaking through when the hammer slipped or the wood warped. Every moment was a goodbye disguised as routine. On the final night before I had to leave, we sat at the edge of the lake. The moonlight painted him in silver, his features soft, almost fragile. "I don't want this to end," I admitted. "It doesn't have to," he said. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "Love doesn't end just because summer does." I swallowed hard. "But distance. Distance is nothing." He cut me off gently, cupping my face in his hands. "What we have is worth fighting for." When he kissed me, it wasn't desperate like before. It was steady, certain, like a promise. Years from now, I'll look back on that summer not as a scandal, not as a mistake, but as the season I learned that real love doesn't always come in the package you expect. Sometimes it's messy, complicated, and terrifying. Sometimes it changes the way people see you, forever. But it also saves you. That summer, a widower found the courage to love again. And I found the courage to believe that love was worth everything we risked. As the sun rose over the lake on my last morning, Michael stood beside me, his hand warm in mine. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Because sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary summers. And ours was just beginning. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, Please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.